Good afternoon, officially, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Steven van der Heijden. I am the VP of Product at OfferZen, and I've got some of my friends and colleagues coming to join in a second. But quickly, before we do that, let me do a quick intro into what we're going to be discussing today. So firstly, we're going to be discussing job descriptions to the right match. So basically, this initial setting yourself up to find the right candidates. So there's a bunch of things that you need to do in order to make your dev hires, how to create a great candidate experience, how to stay on top of communications, that kind of stuff. Today we're focusing on that early stage. So you've got this idea, look, I need to get someone extra on my team. How do I go about putting that down, documenting, setting search criteria, writing a great job description, all that kind of stuff, in order to get you the right person. And these initial setup things are pretty damn important. We've got some cool people from the company, and we've got all of you who hopefully can share some learnings as well in the chat. So before we get going, got some kind of rules of the house. Remember that you can see us, but we can't see you. It's not a Zoom call, it's a webinar. But we can read your chats. So we have two functions that you can use during live or in Livestorm. The one is chat. And to test that out, would be good if you write your name, your company, kind of where you're coming in from. Maybe just drop something in the chat so people can see that you're here and we can know that it's working. So you can do that now. And then the other section is a questions tab. So ideally, if you have a question which you would like one of the panel, myself or one of the other people here to answer, drop it in the questions and we'll make that a structured question kind of during the conversations. Otherwise, so feel free to kind of converse in the chat, share some learnings, bit of banter, you know the drill. And then if you drop a video, whatever the story is, you can find that link in your mail inbox and join again. So that's that. Let's check the chat's working. Yes, we've got some people. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Cool. So moving on quickly about OfferZen, who we are. So we're a tech talent marketplace. For those of you that don't know us, what that means is that we help companies hire developers or help developers get jobs at companies. And we're really focused on helping companies find the right fit, right? We do full-time employment. We're not a matchmaking service for freelancers for a couple of weeks or temporary contractors where you just need to get the work done. We are pretty serious about building great teams that operate on high context, that have impact, that help you build a great business. So we're in the game, the long-term game here. That's why fit is so critical. That's why we're having this webinar today. What is it that we promise our customers? Well, we give customers access to relevant, so fit again, actively looking, again, fit. You don't really want people that aren't really looking, and highly responsive candidates and delivered to the inbox today. And we believe that that's the first step in making your dev hires. So you're not working through other people, you're working directly with the developer. That makes life a lot easier, reduces a lot of the noise in the market, because these developers are curated and they're actively looking. So you're not kind of battling with their time and getting ignored and all of that kind of thing. And that ultimately leads to faster time to hire. And on the developer side, a faster time to get a job. And hopefully a better fit in the long run. So that's what it is that we do. If you haven't used OfferZen before and you want to find out some more stuff, Alex has just thrown a little thing on. You can say, I'd like to know more, in which case we'll send you some info. And you can also just say no, or you can skip the vote. That's all up to you. I would like to know more. So I'm going to submit my vote and keen to see what that mail says. Thanks, Alex. Cool. And then moving forward, we have a strong focus on community. Fundamentally, our mission is to help developers connect with opportunities to build an awesome future. And that comes not only in the form of actually getting a job at companies, but in many, many other ways. And you can see that in these photos. We run conferences, we run make days, we run meetups, we sponsor meetups. We've printed 60,000 t-shirts. We have over 30 different t-shirt designs, and we take it pretty seriously. We take community super seriously because this is the community that we service. This is the community that puts food on our table and whose tables we put food on by helping them get jobs. So it all works pretty nicely. And part of that is these events, right? So we do a series of different events. This morning, in fact, we have every 2 weeks, we have a meetup. That's just Phil Joubert, one of the co-founders, and myself, going through whatever we think is useful to talk about with tech leads. So that's mainly for tech leads and engineering managers. You're welcome to join that. You can go to just Google OfferZen Meetup and you'll find it. Then we also do webinars, which are from tech leaders, CTOs, and they're talking about whatever it is that they are using as their playbooks. So the kind of theme is CTO playbooks, and you can learn from them. And then we also do this, where we're trying to share some of the learnings from OfferZen internally. So a lot of the time we're talking about data. A lot of these that you would have come to before would have been pretty data rich. And you can see those recordings on offerzen.com/events. Sorry, I think I'm getting through all of the admin. We're almost there. So without further ado, jumping into the content, I'd like to invite the rest of the panel onto stage. By saying that, Alex, can you please add them? I don't know how. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. And hopefully it gives you a good array of folks and some different lenses for us to have a cool conversation. A reminder that you can drop your questions for these folks in the polls. I'm going to ask you all to quickly introduce yourselves. And if you can just basically say, I mean, your name's on the screen, so I don't think you need to say that, but it's just kind of nice to say it. And maybe your lens that you bring to the table. What do you do at OfferZen and how that can help you kind of share lessons about, finding the right candidate. Maybe Gert, we start with you.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So my name is Gert. I am a senior account manager at OfferZen. I've worked with, I think, probably close to 300 companies on OfferZen, helping them grow and scale their tech teams, and placed, I think, also close to 300 individuals. So I'm bringing the lens from the company's perspective using OfferZen and how we can better improve hiring that side.
Thank you, Gert. Liba?
Thanks, Stephen. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Liba. I am a talent advisor here at OfferZen, and I work exclusively with candidates. In my time here, I've worked with over 1,000 candidates. Within my role, I support candidates from the moment they're accepted onto the platform all the way through to the end of their first month in a new role, if they were fortunate enough to find a job through OfferZen. So this means that I have insight into what candidates are looking for, as well as immediate insights into their experience interacting with different companies on the platform.
Thank you. That's awesome. You're bringing a lot of volume and experience to the table. Henri?
Cool, thank you. My name is Henri. I'm a product manager in the marketplace squad. That means I'm responsible for figuring out what the product looks like. It actually ends up connecting candidates and companies together. And from the lens of this conversation, the features that we build, the things that we put in place to enable members and companies to find one another, that's my bread and butter, and that's what I care about. So that's what the lens that I'm bringing, and been at OfferZen for more than 3 years now, and I'm very excited for this conversation today.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, given your excitement, you can go first. So first question is pointed at you then, Henri. So I think if we jump into lessons, so I think we discussed this beforehand, and what the first lesson that we were really thinking about is the spec, right? Because you've got this idea in your head that you've got a gap. You need to add someone to your team, and the very first step in that is to codify it, to write it down and say, okay, this is what I'm looking for. And there's different people that do that in different organizations. Sometimes it's the hiring manager, and they pass that over to the recruiters, and sometimes they just get going themselves. Tell us about this spec, Henry, this initial starting point. What are the most important bits of it? What are the lessons that we see are the critical aspects of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, you always start with a need, right? You have some hiring need, you have something specific that you're looking for, and that might be very specific or it might be very vague, right? So if, depending on the company, it might be you're just looking for a React dev, or it might be very specific, you're looking for a candidate based in Cape Town with this specific skill, with this specific amount of experience at this specific budget, etc. And so one of the key, most important things that we've learned or that we've kind of figured out along the way is that you really need to be super clear on which of your requirements are like non-negotiables and which ones you're willing to play around with a bit. Obviously, this is a fluid game, right? Depending on what's available in the market, companies will adjust what they're looking for and they adjust some of their needs. If you can't find what you're looking for, you're willing to adjust the thing. But essentially, you need to know which things are critical, which things are not, and that will differ based on the company and the role that they're hiring for. Some examples are, you firstly need to know if you're looking for a senior or a junior person, right? There's very big differences in how candidates operate in the workplace based on their seniority, and you're either willing for someone to step in and take lead and do the thing, or you're looking for somebody to grow with the business and develop their skills with you along the journey, and that might be a hard or a soft requirement for you. Another example is salary. We all know that salary is this kind of contentious topic that you want to know how much you want to try and spend as little as possible. Candidates want to try and get as much as possible, but essentially you need to know when you're setting up your job spec, like, what is your range? What are you looking for? Are you, it can be smaller or bigger, but you need to know, like, this is the bit that I'm willing to budge on, and this is like, I'm happy to pay between 50 and 70,000 rand a month, but if I can find the right person, I'm actually willing to pay 80. So it's like, what are you searching for, and what are you willing to budge on? It might not be the same answer. And then there's some specific requirements. Some companies have specific requirements for location, right? So if you're a hybrid or an office company, you'll know that if you're looking for a hybrid role in Cape Town, you probably want someone based in and around Cape Town. You're not really looking to hire someone in Joburg, or you are, but then you're willing to have a negotiation around relocation and things like that. So getting super crisp on what the things are that's important to you and what's the things that you're willing to budge on is really important. And then bringing the OfferZen lens to this, when you come to the job search process, making sure that you codify that, making sure that in our world we use positions and we use, which is essentially the job spec on OfferZen, and we also use the search. And taking your information and specifying it correctly in those features will help you find what you're looking for. If you get it wrong, your search results that you'll be seeing will be won't be what you're looking for. You'll find candidates that aren't the right fit. And if you're too strict, then, well, maybe you won't find what you're looking for, because React devs with 10 years experience don't come at 20,000 rand a month type of thing. So yeah, I think getting super clear on what you're looking for is super important.
Yeah, I like that idea. I mean, I think the example's quite extreme, but the idea that, look, there's a practical, like, I needed someone on my team and they have a budget, right? And then there's like, write down my wish list, and then there's some gap in between the two of those. You deal with companies all day. How do you think about this, and what have you seen in the market where people start with a wish list and they have a budget and they kind of ignore the budget, or they ignore the wish list, depending on the persona? Like, what's your experience of how people manage this balance?
Yeah. So you were saying wish list. I think the term that I use with companies is grocery list. I think a lot of the times, when companies are so specific, I'm speaking specifically from an OfferZen lens, when they do a search, they will include almost every single thing that's on that list into the search. do a search and say that there's absolutely nobody available on the platform, which is quite hard because, people may have worked with the skill set in the past, but they might not currently have put it at the top skill on their profile. What I usually do with companies is I'll ask them, what are the non-negotiables? And usually that starts with the tech stack. You can start with location and salary and all those different things, but without this core skill, would the person be able to do the job or not? And then kind of build the job spec from there. I'm going to talk about it a bit more later about the relationship between hiring managers and HR, who essentially usually use the platform, and why it's good to kind of have a good understanding of what the role entails and what this key skill is. But what I usually suggest is, what are the 2 to 3 core skills, and then build the job spec from there. Most devs will have AWS or something like that, and I don't think that needs to be in a core skill bracket. But I think most companies, when they do a search, they'll include it, and then the candidates might not have it listed, and they might not find these people. So kind of just, even on the job spec, if you are looking at one, highlighting those skills before you start the search is actually what I would say the most essential thing to start with.
I think that's a really good point, and super keen to hear your breakdown on that handover. I think there's so much that gets lost in that handover, and we as a company that's originally built for devs by devs, we serviced the engineering managers at the beginning, and then we had to cater for the whole hiring team. And in that little bit, you can just go, well, this is my grocery list, and I need all of them. And the amount of myths you get from not getting that right, I think, is quite scary, and that's hopefully something that we can help with. And it's a question I asked in the chat. I'd be here. Thanks, Sarah, for answering. We love PHP, by the way. We made the Laravel documentary, so no hatred from us. But the question is just, how do people generally approach this? And what you're saying, Gert, is that you start general with the real critical to haves, and then you specify into those. What happens if I increase my salary range or decrease my salary range, or all that kind of stuff. Henri, just a question on the way that our tooling is built. Like, how do we think about that in our current state, where we're going with our vision to try and help customers take that approach of like start general, go tighter, perhaps?
Yeah, it's definitely part of our vision thinking is that, so we have these two concepts of positions and search. And at the moment, you create a position, you specify what you're looking for, we translate some of that into a search filter for you, and then you're able to adjust those search filters, meaning depending on how narrowly or how broadly you specify the position, that same search will be different, right? So I guess the approach that we want to get to in the future is one where we start more general, right? Your position is, this is in general what you're looking for. You're willing to put that out there. Maybe you see way too many results and some of them are irrelevant, but then when you start searching and you start tweaking, then you can actually narrow it down to the exact specific matches that you're looking for.
Yeah, I think we had quite a few conversations within the product teams over the last couple of weeks, and I think it might be useful just to share that there's the concept of this description of the job, and then there's the search, right? And I think that might be useful if you're actually actively recruiting, to not feel like if you're deviating on your search criteria that you're changing your job spec. The job is to explore and find the people out there that could match, and then do a secondary amount of work to really check that match. But there's two kinds of exercises and steps here, and our product is kind of built around that, but that's definitely something we've seen. Gert, do you have any stories or customers that you think get this right, or anything you can share with us on that side?
Yes, yeah. One of my biggest clients is actually a gambling company where the team is quite large. They have, let's say, about 10 to 12 different talent acquisition people on the platform actively using it. And with them, I think they just have a very good understanding of what the key skills are when reaching out to candidates. I think on average, on a yearly basis, they make around 30 hires successfully on the platform. And how it usually works when I have a conversation around them is there will be a job spec. The job spec is essential, but it would be more around the conversation of what is the core skill set. For example, C# and .NET. Those are the two things. And what makes it easy for this company is they are remote. So if you put that in, you put the salary, you put the remote, you find the candidates quite easily. But I think even if you are a hiring manager and you have set up the job spec and you want HR or the talent acquisition people to start with it, I think it should always start with a conversation around, listen, here's the job spec, that's cool, but these are the 3 things that I'm looking for. Without that, the candidate won't work. That's what I would suggest.
100%. So there's the internal job spec, right, which the hiring manager has a conversation with the recruiter, and then whoever's doing the recruiting has 2 artifacts. Is their search criteria, right, which they can play with, move up and down on and stuff, and the other thing is the description of the job, right? If you're looking for someone at 5 years experience, the market's pretty busy, there's a lot of supply coming in, there's a lot of applications, maybe make it 8 years, right? To try and, because if you put 5 people, with 3 will apply, but you have these tools. And one should feel free to use those tools to the best of your ability to do your pre-filtering, right? That said, it's a bit deceptive. So Liba, from a TA perspective, which stands for Talent Advisor, if you hear me say TA, I mean Talent Advisor, AM is Account Manager. How does this manifest on the candidate side, right? Candidates building a profile, and fundamentally tools like us or LinkedIn or whatever is matching against the candidate profile. And candidates will, I mean, in my experience, they'll often say like, cool, I'm a this dev, but I'm a dev. I can learn stuff. Like, how does this work? What's your take, Liba?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'd say with candidates, ideally, especially using the platform, one of the key selling points for them is the fact that they maybe expect to receive clearly outlined job specs, right? So clearly outlined responsibilities, expectations, and required skills on those job specs. But they also do want there to be a highlighting and an emphasis on the growth and learning opportunities as well that a company might be offering. So in as much as maybe the skill set that they bring to the table might not necessarily match directly with the job spec, if a company emphasizes opportunities for career development and professional growth, those are usually the kind of things that do appeal to candidates when they are reading a job spec. So a company can, mention those through, the training programs that they might have, or the mentorship opportunities, or the pathways for advancement that might exist within the company. So yeah, I'd say those are probably the things that a candidate would be looking for in a job spec.
Cool. I'm going to move on to our 1.5 in the lesson. Is there anything that anyone here wants to add quickly before we move on? All right. Cool. So, and it's related. So I think the lesson 1B is what you think you're looking for and what you're actually looking for are often very, very closely aligned, but they're not always the same, right? So I suppose what are the tricks in order to help you break your kind of mindset? I mean, you mentioned, and Sorrel actually mentioned, it's just like I start with PHP because that's my non-negotiable. But are there tricks that we think either within the product or that we've seen in the market to go, okay, cool, here's my grocery list, but if perhaps people that are off the grocery list might just fit. Have we seen that happening within the product or within the customers?
Yeah. Sorry, Henri, you can go.
Cool. I will take that. I think that we've seen very clear examples, right? And as such, the simplest thing that we have already implemented is the fact that we now distinguish between must-have and nice-to-have skills. So a specific feature that we have is when you're creating your position, your job spec, or when you're performing a search, you can specify which things are must-have and which things are nice-to-have. Get that right, you win. Get that wrong, you end up seeing very few results. Another take on this is that I think we've recently changed OfferZen from a single-sided marketplace to be a dual-sided marketplace, meaning that we now have candidates that are able to apply to you directly on the platform. And those two, you now kind of have these two different means of finding candidates, right? So you either go and you perform a search, you're proactive. In that sense, you probably want to be very specific in what you're looking for. And other means you could be more reactive, meaning you're publishing your position, your job spec. You're making it visible to candidates and they can apply. And in that sense, that might be a little bit more broad because you're willing to budge on which candidates you're receiving applications from. So I think there's a proactive and a reactive approach, and it's most likely, it seems to be more useful in a proactive approach to be more specific, and in a reactive approach to be more generic, which helps you get the best of both worlds, get the best of both scenarios.
Yeah, I suppose that highlights that trade-off between volume and relevance, right? This is how many folks do you see in the search listings versus how tight are they to your grocery list. But the mention of apply and the kind of, so for those of you that don't know, candidates can apply to a listing if you publish it on OfferZen, and it appears in an inbox next to your sourcing kind of tooling, which is a new game for us, right? Those candidates currently, Henri, explain how we make sure that those candidates are relevant, right? Because we don't want just anybody and everybody applying, because then this whole idea that you've got this grocery list that you want people to match to kind of gets thrown out the window if any Tom, Dick, and Harry can apply to a job.
Yeah, that's very true, and it's a very tight trade-off that we're currently. It's a balancing act, right? We want to make sure that you get enough applications. We also want to make sure that we give candidates the means to find different opportunities. But at the same time, we want to make sure that the applications that are coming in from candidates are not horribly useless, right? They are good candidates that match what you're looking for. And so what we've done at this point is that we're not showing candidates all the available positions on OfferZen. We're limiting the positions that they see based on the roles that they're looking for. So if you're a designer, you're not seeing all the dev roles. If you're a developer, you're a backend developer, then you're seeing all the backend developer roles, right? That's the first thing. And the other thing that we've done is, that's a very specific implementation, is we've very specifically ranked that list that candidates can see, which means that the ones that candidates see at the top of their list are the ones that are the best potential to become a match. So the best opportunities for them where they fit the best, thereby driving applications that might result in a actual placement at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So it's a tight balance. We want to give candidates a great experience, but at the same time, we also want to make sure that we're getting relevant applications, not just volumes.
The one thing that I'm quite interested in this is that, as OfferZen, we're really invested in fit, right? And I think most on a company side, I think that's also very, very true. I think what is interesting is on the candidate side is that in a very supply constrained market maybe is true, but when people need more of a job, they're kind of not so worried about fit as much as they are just getting an opportunity potentially. Liba, I suppose, I don't know if you've worked with any candidates that are applying to jobs that are, how do you what is the general thematic that you see with candidates? Are they quite serious about making sure that the fit is right, or are they just kind of looking for a gig at a company that sounds cool and they'll kind of feel like they can grow into it, or leave that matching up to the company, I suppose, is the question. And does that change in seniority? I imagine it would, but I have no data to back that up.
That's a good question, Stephen. It's a bit of both, and it does differ in terms of seniority. So what you do find is the more experienced a candidate is, the more clear they are about what they're looking for in their next job, right? So something where we actually fit in as talent advisors is also to kind of make candidates aware of some of the things that they might not be thinking about, right? Because as you mentioned, it is about creating a fit, but a good long-term fit. So sometimes candidates do enter the job market and they neglect to think about some things that might be potential deal breakers for them. So I'd say three things that. Yeah, sure. So an example would be remote work and flexibility, right?
Okay.
Sometimes companies aren't very clear about their policies around that, right? And so something I do encourage candidates to do is to make sure that they ask those questions very clearly upfront, right? So that can get an idea, if it's hybrid, how hybrid is it? If they've got flexible working hours, what is that level of flexibility? And then other things could also be growth opportunities, right? So career development and learning opportunities. Candidates want access to these kind of things. And that is usually a big motivation for them in the job search. And another thing is company culture and values, which a lot of people will say is very difficult to figure out during the job search, right? You only find that out when you've joined the company. That's what a lot of candidates will come onto the platform and say. But I do emphasize to them that there are ways to find this out, right? To get some information. And so part of my job is equipping them with the tools to ask the right kinds of questions, to approach that properly, so that you can make sure that they are aligned with the company cultures and values that are being offered by various companies.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that kind of segues us nicely into lesson number 2, because it's talking about how do you codify the things that you're looking for, right? So Liba's talking about culture, but one of the other things which you mentioned earlier is the translation of that thing into your document or something, but then also the pass on between people that have hiring responsibilities within an organization. Somebody has a need to fill, but that person is generally busy managing or busy executing as an IC, right? So what happens often in the market is that someone helps them with the recruiting, right? And we call it, for instances, or for the purpose of this conversation, we'll call that your recruiter. Okay. So what happens is the engineering manager says, hey, I need Scala dev, whatever the story is. Here's my requirements, jots them down, remembering that this is not this person's job. This is like, for quite often, it's like a grudge thing that they need to do because they're actually building, like managing the team and shipping features. So the lesson number 2 is the clear communication between that person who knows what needs to fill and the person who's actually doing the work. So Gert, what are you seeing? Where does this go right? Where does this go wrong?
Sure. So just the first point that I want to mention is I think most companies either get a recruiter or they have some hiring person because they want to save time. I think saving time is essential. Hiring can take forever. A key metric that we actually look at is time to hire. And I think one of the first things that I'll discuss with the company is who is going to be responsible for firstly screening and then interviewing the candidates. I think the majority of companies tend to segment it. So they will have a hiring team and then they will have the hiring manager. The hiring manager will write up the job spec, share it with the hiring team, and then the hiring team will do the whole thing up until maybe a final interview. And then the hiring manager might do the interview and it's a no. So what I've actually seen works quite well is when the hiring manager works quite closely with the recruiter. And that doesn't mean the hiring manager has to do everything. I think from an OfferZen perspective, we have all these candidates on the platform. We actually have the search to make it as easy as possible to find these candidates. Literally 5 minutes on a Monday, you take a look at who's new and you can actually just tag your HR team to take it from there. So you basically give the first look at the profile, you see this key skill set, you see the background, everything basically, just the initial look at the profile, and then you hand it over to HR to take it from there. I found that works very well because like we've said, a lot of the time somebody who might not have the technical know-how will reach out to somebody and go through all these assessments and all these things, but then in the actual interview the person might not be a good fit. So getting that initial kind of screening from the manager helps a lot. I've also seen, I know it's not always possible in a bigger company if you're hiring for like 20 roles, for you to do that. But in a smaller company where you guys actually can afford it, I've actually seen that it helps a lot if the hiring manager is the person that sends the initial message to say, hey, we're interested. Because I think that gets a lot of buy-in. And once the candidate has accepted, you hand it over to the recruiter as well. I think that helps a lot. But I would also suggest, if a recruiter is actively hiring for your role, having a regular check-in or catch up with them, even if it's maybe you just have one session with them where you look at a few profiles that they've sourced and you give them your feedback. I think that's vital, because I think the worst thing would be if you get to the final stage, this person has been in process for three weeks and then it's not a fit at all, but that's the first time that you meet this person.
Is it fair to say that you're suggesting that front loading, like the hiring manager's involvement, is what you're saying? Like,
yes.
Bring it right up front, an early investment, quite heavy, and then kind of tapering it off a little bit later in both the funnel and in the process.
Correct, because the hiring manager is going to be working with this person in the end anyways. I find that works best.
Okay, so practically that looks like, the first step is get together in front of some profiles and start doing them together or taking them in team notes or something like that? Do you think that's the best?
Correct. Yeah, our platform is set up for that type of collaboration. Like what a lot of managers do is they'll take a look at a profile they like. In a team note, they'll tag the recruiter, and then the recruiter will see, okay, this is the type of profile that I should be looking for. Easy.
Yeah. And I suppose we've spoken about it in the last week or two, Henry, but like how does recommendations play into this, right? You've got that early hire. If we can figure out ways in which we can, I don't think we do. I mean, I know we don't, but it would be interesting to go look like this is a hiring manager favorite. We can prioritize it in the recommendations engine because that's just the high signal type thing. How are we thinking about that from a product perspective, Henry?
Yeah, there's a lot of signals around, like signals of intent, right? Knowing when a hiring manager or an account manager, for that matter, identifies a certain profile, a certain candidate as a potential good match, even though they haven't reached out yet, even though that conversation hasn't started yet. There's team notes, there's favorites, and so on. And we can use all of that to identify which types of candidates you're looking for, and we can recommend you more like that. So one of the features which it's not officially on the roadmap, I'm not selling it, but one of the things that we're thinking about is when you've identified a candidate and you've sent an interview request, which is the first reach out on the platform, we can very easily recommend you 5 other similar candidates based on that specific candidate you've reached out. So those are the types of things that we can do that really drive more of the same, which can help you find more of those candidates without. We can use AI and all sorts of tools to do that. So lots of opportunities there.
Gert, I suppose one more question on this lesson is like, what is the sign that you're not doing this well? What does it look like when this is going a bit pear-shaped?
Cool. We actually have a few internal or key metrics that we use to measure whether a company's hiring is successful. The 3 that we look at is time to hire. So this basically means initial interaction all the way up to the actual hire. On average, on OfferZen, it's usually between 3 to 4 weeks, but ideally, shorter than that would be awesome. Then the second metric we usually look at is offer acceptance rates. So this means when the candidate actually gets to the offer stage, do they accept the offer, yes or no? And I think that initial buy-in from the hiring manager would actually help a lot with that to get the candidate excited about the role.
Really?
And then the last one is the interview request acceptance rate. So this is that initial reach out you have to a candidate on the platform, whether the candidate says yes or no. I've seen that if the hiring manager does the initial reach out saying, hey, I'm Peter, I'm working as the manager of this team looking for this, that gets a lot of buy-in from candidates. I think that actually, if it's a very important role, I would actually suggest that's probably the best thing to do.
Yeah.
I've seen those 3 are very important, but on average, I would probably say time to hire is what I would be looking at to, is this hiring process working and is it saving time and giving time back to the team as well?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like that that relationship between the hiring manager and the recruiter is like a critical roles and responsibility setup. Do you see customers having very explicit docs on this? I know we have that at OfferZen. It's quite clear who's doing what and who's responsible for what outcome and that kind of stuff. Are there some stories of customers who are really good at this? Because to make that first reach out takes a lot of time, right? It takes a bit of effort, and we have to say in principle, listen, this is something we're going to focus on. It's important. Have you seen customers take that like role definition super seriously, or is it kind of just come out in the wash?
Yes, I think I can think of one good example. In this example, the hiring managers actually do the majority of the work when it comes to the recruitment. They have a HR manager that kind of takes over when it comes to the contract stage. But I think the initial reach out is the hiring manager. The tech assessment gets done, but the hiring manager will take a look at it and kind of grade it. And then the final interview would probably be also hiring manager, but then the HR would be included. So they actually do the opposite of, I think, what most companies actually expect the hiring process to look like. They are a smaller company, so they have, I would say, a slightly more time. but it's definitely worked, and I've seen a few companies pick it up. I usually actually suggest, if a company is struggling, maybe we should get some hiring managers on the platform, even just to screen a few profiles.
That's that's really interesting. I mean, it seems, as you say, it seems kind of counterintuitive that in order to save hiring manager time, you need to get them more involved and earlier, because it
Exactly.
reduces your overall time to hire, and then everybody's saving time. Your positions are open less long, and I think the cost of work in progress is not to be underestimated, if you've read the Lean Startup or any of these kinds of productivity type books. Okay, so speaking of that experience of that initial interview request, sometimes coming from someone who's going to be your boss potentially, or somebody who's not. Let's talk about the candidate experience, because I think if we're going through to, from requirements, we've discussed, what nice to have, very important skills. We've discussed that, communicating those and or defining the roles between who communicates those or does that sourcing. Like, Gert, I suppose the question was, how do you communicate it well? And your answer to me was more like, do it together more than try and hand it over, is what I heard from you. Because it's a dark art to some extent, right? It's just, you don't really know, like what Sarah was saying here about the Python devs, etc. So talking about the candidate-centric experience, what do you experience when you get that first message? Liba, have you got some perspective, from a developer side? What does that candidate-centric experience look like, and how does that progress, that fit towards the match?
Right. Yeah, I think to the point that Gert was making, that it is a lot more, it does feel a lot more appealing when you hear directly from someone you'll potentially be reporting to. That usually is crucial. But I would say also clearly communicating each step of the hiring process and expected timelines can go a long way to priming a candidate for what to expect. It's not always intentional. Well, it's never, I don't believe it's intentional from a company to usually maybe go silent in between steps of the process. But usually, if you are able to manage those expectations up front, a candidate's experience interacting with the company doesn't sour at any point. So you do sometimes have candidates that go through the process and maybe the company goes quiet for whatever reason, and the way they feel about the opportunity changes, the way they feel about the company changes, because they almost see that as a preview into what it would look like working there, right? Like the way they approach the communication. So yeah, I'd say the companies that do tend to get this right are the ones that have a streamlined and transparent hiring process. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a short process. I've seen companies that have 5 steps in the interview process do really well with candidates, simply because they communicate really well. They're very clear and explicit about what each step entails. And they pretty much do tell candidates that if they hold their end of the bargain, this can be done within a 2 to 3 week timeline of whatever the case may be. And then I would also say that when hiring managers or the people that are doing the recruiting, when they're engaging and personalize the communication with candidates, that does go a long way. So if you acknowledge any unique qualifications or interests or skills, essentially showing that you've engaged and interacted with their profile, that's usually a positive thing. And as I mentioned, just maintaining regular contact and providing constructive feedback also works. And then giving a candidate a glimpse into the company culture quite early also usually goes a long way. So even if it's like a short blurb about what kind of culture they have, what kind of culture a candidate can expect, as well as also involving potential future colleagues in the interview process, that also really does the trick as well. Yeah.
So that's, we've got this idea that, we're talking about finding the candidates. There's part of finding the candidates is keeping the candidate throughout the process and keeping them interested and selling that. And what, just to play it back, basically is, it's not just about having this fit in the internal sense, right? Where okay, this candidate fits, but making it clear to the candidate what your bits of the fit are, to make sure that they have the same corresponding bits, right? So telling them what it is, telling them, and that those bits are not just technical skills, it's expectations of how long this is going to take, right? Because
Right.
even if this person is the perfect match skills wise, and you think you're so happy because you found the perfect match, it doesn't mean that you're the perfect match for them. And that maybe you're the perfect skills match, but maybe you just take too long. Maybe you don't write in a nice way. Maybe it's not clear what you actually do and what impact you create in the world. So these are all important parts of that side of things. Gert, is that what's the company lens on that? Do you agree with what Liba's saying, or should we have a little debate?
No, no, Liba's right on the money there. I actually have one company that actually has a write-up of their whole interview process. So they write their interview process: week 1, you can expect this; week 2, you can expect this; week 3, you can expect this, and this is the basic timeline. And candidates love it. I think it definitely helps with creating visibility because, of course, like Liba said, the candidate doesn't want to be left in the dark. But I also see the inverse of that, where I see companies being left in the dark. And I think a lot of companies want to almost keep their interview process a secret. Like, you don't know what to expect next. Where I find that if the company is open, almost in the initial interaction, sharing a little blurb of like, this is what you can expect, this is the timeline, that keeps commitment on both sides. Because I think then the candidate also knows what they need to be doing in the next week, and the company knows what the candidate is expecting. I found that is super, super important. And then also from our side, because like Liba deals with the candidate, because he knows what the timeline looks like, he can also check in with the candidate to make sure that they stay on track, which I think just creates visibility across the board.
Lovely. So just to recap a little bit, because we're talking about all the way from job description to finding the right candidate. And so the first one is writing that down. How do you translate it and all that stuff? Then how do you actually how do you figure out what are the bets that are fit criteria and which are not? And the answer we have is like, you got a collab. You don't hand it over, you don't throw it over a fence. That's the recipe for disaster. You got to work together as a team, collaborate. We have the tooling for that. And that kind of moves forward. But even then, once you've got that, you found the right person, then it's about not necessarily selling, but making sure that you continue to be explicit about who it is that you are, so that they can see the fit, not pretend to have fit. I think that's one thing we don't want to create, is that you sell too hard, right? You tell them things that are not true, or the candidate says things that are not true, or what the expectations are, or what they want from the world. I'm fine with hybrid. Meanwhile, I want remote. Being honest on both sides, I suppose, is true. And that's, I imagine, that a large part of the jobs that the two of you do is trying to keep people true to what they actually want.
True.
Yeah. Cool. And then, I suppose, and then as from a product perspective, Henri, we've got a whole product is kind of based around this theory of trying to make sure that there's visibility across the board and people can see each other. Anything anyone wants to add on that summary before we move over to some questions?
I can add one small bit, which is just that as a platform that we have, our core matching algorithm, the way that how well we're able to present the right opportunities to a company or to a candidate is fully dependent on the data that's being input, right? And that's on the candidate side as well as on the company side. And that's why this comment around like being explicit about what you're looking for is really important. We also still have more work to do to improve the data that we're capturing, to make it more accurate, to make it more explicit, to make it be better. But fundamentally, the better data you put in, the better matches you'll get out on the other side. So the better fit candidates you'll find. So that's for me is also a key takeaway, that if you're setting up a job spec on OfferZen, make sure you do that well. And if you're a candidate side, make sure that you specify exactly what you're looking for and what your experience are.
Yeah, I suppose that's a metaphor actually to going forward, that our system requires the right explicit data, but so does your colleagues, and so does the candidate. So make sure you write it down, make sure you're clear. I think that's one of the big lessons that we're talking about right here, is like clarity and explicit thinking is your friend that helps you get there, and being clear on what is required and what is just nice to have. I think those are two important ones. Let's jumping over to the questions. We've got a question from Chris Metcalf for Liba. Liba, you mentioned company values earlier. What are the most common company values you're seeing candidates looking for recently?
So okay, I can see the question now. Yeah, so I'd say one thing is diversity and inclusivity, I'd say. Firstly, I'd say a lot of candidates are looking for a welcoming environment to join. And I'd also say an environment that is supportive and innovative, right? That welcomes innovation from candidates as well. I'd say those are probably the most important things that candidates are looking for, along with the things that feel very obvious, such as transparency in those company values, as well as how they're actually implemented in everyday work life as well. So yeah, I think for candidates, it's not enough just to see it on paper. They almost want to see it, even if it's implicitly throughout the interview process, or with you kind of explicitly articulating, this is how we implement those values within the company. Yeah, but I'd say a supportive environment, an inclusive environment, and diversity are usually the biggest things that candidates are looking for.
Nice, thanks, Liba. You're popular. You have another question for you. Are engineers more motivated by solving engineering problems? This is a tough question. Or joining a company culture or mission? What would you invest in putting forward more if you had to choose?
That is a good question. Well, look, one of the things that we do whenever candidates receive a match on the platform is we perform an intent check, right, to get an understanding of what actually is motivating their job search. So something that does come up quite often is the fact that candidates feel like they've either hit a ceiling or they're stagnating in their current role, and they're looking for new challenges, looking for ways to take that next step in their career. So at least based as a non-technical person, based on the interactions I've had, I would say that the most common motivation is one of moving to that next level. So to answer your question, I'd say they do seem to be motivated by solving engineering problems, the kind of problems that help them advance in their careers. But that's not to say that they won't have a follow-up motivation, such as the kind of culture that they would be joining. Because as we said here, it's not just about putting bums and seats, right? Someone to fill a role. It is also about creating a long-term fit, and so the culture does go a long way to supporting that. So yeah, I'd say the most important thing is still solving problems, but there is still the desire for a good culture fit.
I see Nick is in the chat next, one of our engineering managers. Thanks, Nick, for popping in. Because I'm going to say something and you might tell me I'm talking nonsense. But in my role as the VP of product, I get to work very closely with the engineers. And I'm super lucky because we've got insanely senior engineers. And I'm only saying that because Nick's here. And they're really impact focused. The one thing that I fundamentally believe is that your ability to solve an engineering problem is a function of how much autonomy you actually have to solve problems. So you can have the most interesting engineering problems in the world in your business, but if that specific engineer is not going to be empowered to actually solve problems as opposed to work on a predefined solution, I think that can stifle the whole thing. So if you've got interesting engineering problems, but you don't have a culture of treating engineers like problem solvers, I wouldn't lead with the problem. I think the one thing that you want to do is, I mean, I'm a maker myself, code, do whatever I need to do, but I want to solve problems. And I think fundamentally the archetype of engineers are problem solvers. So putting forward a culture of problem solving, because even if you don't have interesting engineering problems now, if you get great engineers, you will, because they're going to find what those problems are to solve. And then I think the business will be great. And I think in my experience, that's what engineers are about. We've had, like, we run these events, make days and all that kind of stuff. And we come to these days with no real problems, but we find plenty to solve. And that's really the fun of it, and where I don't want to use the word, but innovation comes from, is by trying to figure that out. So if it was me, I would just try and make it super clear to people that this is a place where you can come and solve problems, not a place where there's a problem, we know what the solution is, we need you to write some lines of code. I don't know if that's really where you want to be. I'll share a little picture as well, which Henri's also seen before, about building bridges. Cool. Let's go back to the questions. There's a question. What is the appetite for working with uncommon skills? I'm thinking of Scala, Rust, Golang, Clojure type of skills here for junior candidates. I suppose that's a question then for you, Libas. Amongst juniors, are people keen on Scala, Rust, Golang, Clojure, or people are just wanting to be JS rock stars these days, or is that kind of fad over? What's happening in the market?
No, that's a great question. Typically, juniors, at least in my experience, I find that because they're very early in their career, they don't restrict themselves, right? So even like to maybe your more common or popular languages, they usually show an open-mindedness to learn, right? Like for them, it's about getting their foot in the door and starting their careers. Usually, though, they for some of those that are maybe thinking a little bit long term, they will look at something, for example, like Clojure and say, cool, would this be easily transferable though to the next job, right? So usually in a case like that, I would say to them, articulate that kind of concern to the company member that you're speaking to, ask that question, see if they can provide you with any guidance or fresh perspective on that. But yeah, to answer the question, I would say typically junior candidates do have an appetite for all kinds of technologies because the priority largely for them is to find a stable environment to kind of start their career.
Awesome. Thanks, Liba. I have one last question. I'm going to pose it to each of you in turn, and you keep it short then because we only have 4 more minutes. Is what advice, let's go for one piece of advice would you give to companies struggling to find the right tech talent? Let's start with you, Gert.
I would say you are not going to know what the market is like if you're not actively engaging with the market. I think I've got a lot of companies where they'll say they can't find candidates on the platform, but they are not actually speaking to candidates. I think without that action, we can first have the initial reach outs, have the interviews, everything, and then if it's not a good fit, then I think we can look at the blockers. But I think the inaction is probably the biggest blocker, kind of making a decision about the candidates that are available before actually having actual interviews with them, is what I would say.
Liba?
I'll go. I'd say, and we did kind of touch on this earlier, but do not neglect candidate experience. When the margins are thin, when it comes to a candidate making a decision at the end of the process, I've seen candidates make a decision based on their experience throughout the interview process, the people they interacted with, how they were communicated with, even things maybe they would have read up on the company online. So I'd say the crucial thing from my side is not to neglect candidate experience because right or wrong, a good portion of them will treat that experience as a preview of things to come if they were to join the company. So yeah, that's what I'd
What's
say.
the number one piece of advice within candidate experience?
Communication, regular, manage expectations, and you'll never go wrong by emphasizing the why. This is why we need to do this step in the process, or this is why our interview process is this long. So that's what I'd say.
Awesome. Thanks, Liba. Henri?
Cool. I'm going to pick 2 because I can't think of only one. The first one is start broad and then narrow down. So don't jump in with the very specific exact requirements you're looking for specifically that you might not find what you're looking for, and then you'll walk away and go, oh, there's nothing. Rather start broadly, narrow it down, and see how close you can get. And then you can also always broaden it up a little bit afterwards. And the second one is maybe consider both a proactive and a reactive approach. So if you're typically a company that is only looking at applications coming in and you're vetting them, then maybe you want to consider being proactive and going and searching for candidates. And similarly, if you're maybe a company who's really likes OfferZen's original model, which is that you reach out to candidates, you're being proactive, maybe consider opening up your jobs to get applications as well and see what you get. There's definitely wins on both sides. Both come with pros and cons, but consider both. think those will be very useful.
Awesome. Yeah, I think closing thought there is you've got to try a lot of different things. You've got to try many different channels. Ultimately, you're after the right fit, right? And sometimes that's on OfferZen, sometimes that's not, right? We are here as a team to try and help you find that fit. If it's not a right fit, we're not going to tell the candidate to take it or tell the company to push it. So yeah, try all the channels, try all the things. And if there are ways in which we can make it better, you know where to find us. Chat to your AM, chat to your TA, or chat to us in the product team. And want to say thanks very much for joining us, everyone. Appreciate all the questions and the engagement, and we'll see you soon. Have a good Wednesday, folks.
Thank you. Bye.